Let's explore autistic history and the Autism Wars. This is part 44 of a series. Woo! The Autism Wars are ramping up again. Ramping up. We have gone through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and now we are solidly in the 90s. We touched over into the 2000s just a little bit, just a touch, from the autistic point of view of Jim Sinclair in this article. But what does this article show us happening then that is still happening now? What patterns are we still experiencing? Because I'm telling you, all these years later, we're still cycling. So first, one of the surprising things to me when I very first time I read this article some years ago was the bridge building between autistics and parents of autistics. It is possible. There was a lot of connecting between autistics and parents back then until there was interference. Autistics are not speaking to the narrative that these autism organizations want out there. And so while the autism community is fractured itself into certain belief systems, the autism community is very separate and fractured over here. It's made of parents of autistics, NTs, and others who have certain belief systems about autism, and they are affiliated with researchers and organizations that embrace these as well. Very separately, you have the autistic community that is made of autistic people and actual allies who have become part of the community. So these are very, very vastly different communities, vastly different cultures, vastly different histories that are intertwined. And that bit of hope that I took from this was that connection with parents back in the day between autistics and parents of autistics. It is absolutely possible. And so I've been seeing more of this bridge building in recent years, but I'm not sure how much we've expanded or advanced in this area, but this does give me hope. One of the things we learn from this is so important that when autistics connect with other autistics, there is a sense and feeling of homecoming. You are now in autistic community, you now are in a space where your mannerisms are just exactly as they are. There's no problem with existing as you are in autistic space. You can STEM, you can have all the types of humor you want, you can have interactions you want or not as you want, as you're capable, and with the little tags to help make that possible. So it's a vastly different culture inside the community in conferences compared to the absolute chaos, noise, and tragedy narrative and just the sheer sensory onslaught of autism conferences. And we learn that autistics will socialize with autistics in ways that we don't do with NTs organically. So we will sit by ourselves in a room, a lunchroom full of NTs. We'll get to the furthest side possible and have some space. At least that's my experience, and many people I know were the same way, but that's not everybody's experience, I know. But when you have a room full of autistics, they all gather together. You don't see that divide happening there. So, it's just astonishing to me that these were things that they knew back then but didn't carry over to when I was parenting. None of this was information I knew back then or was being given. Ooh. One of the most shocking things to me, because all these years we have the discrediting tactics, and one of those is to say, you're not like my child, you're not autistic enough to have value in this conversation that they're having, or you're too autistic to know what you need and have a voice in this. Those discrediting tactics, or you're a novelty, a rarity, and there's only really one like you, so you really can't compare to all the other ones around you. So these are discrediting tactics, but what I see is these segregation, the segregation of autistics started with these parent organizations. They didn't want to mix the high functioning and the low functioning. These are awful, awful, awful labels, but this is historically what they were at the time. Geez, I'm astounded. I guess it's just ever evolving. But they were the ones that were trying to segregate autistics from autistics in the beginning. It was just, wow. And here we are with inclusion. How do we make this work for all autistics? And we see the autism community giving pushback on this, but the autistic community, Autism Network International, did not comply, and they just did not comply for that. But they did learn boundaries had to be established. Absolutely needs to be boundaries. And they learned to create autistic space, which is incredibly important and valuable to us. But in my experience, in everything I've read and lived experience, the autism community, when the autism community is included, the autistic community is excluded. This is, to the point in the 90s, they just silenced us from the bigger conversation. Silenced. And the autism wars between the different fronts in the autism community are getting fierce. These people are just as wicked to each other as they are to us. And I couldn't understand why. Why is this happening? Why is this all happening when supposedly it's autistic people that they're trying to help and support? I mean, why is it so vicious? Oh, it's like everything else. It's all about the money and the power. Legislation, the autism market. It's all about controlling who gets the attention, so who gets the money, and who gets the power to influence everything about autism. Oh my gosh. This is why they don't want this heard, because we don't fit their tragedy narrative of autism, and therefore we don't fit what they're putting out there as needing to be researched and needing to be helped. They don't even want them to see us because they're talking about a lost generation of autistics and how we didn't exist before. At the same time, in the background, they're actually battling and arguing and doing terrible things to autistic people in this conversation and successfully keeping them out of the public conversation. So we aren't even acknowledged as existing. And if you're autistic, woman, you just don't exist. You're such a unicorn at this point. They don't even believe that autistic women exist in the numbers that we do. Much less, so everything we know about autism came from these organizations in order to power the narrative they wanted getting out there so they could get the attention, the money, the legislation, the research, the funding. We're talking millions and billions of dollars here. We're talking these autism organizations are backed with funding that autistic community can't even fathom. There's such a difference here. Autism community has all the funding, all the money, all the influence with doctors and with legislation and with our lifespans, and they wanted their ideas funded, not services and supports for the lifetime of autistics. They wanted a cure. So they didn't fund lifetime supports and things like that for autistics. Instead, they took all that money from our communities and put it where they wanted, leaving us to figure out how to deal with adulthood all by ourselves, and all by ourselves for our children who are autistic. Yep, that's where we're at right now. So we'll come back around. Thank you for learning some more autistic history.